Welcome to the Bayer Vegetation Management Stewardship Learning Series. This learning series consists of various modules addressing common topics of proper stewardship. This module will focus on record keeping and regulations. In this module, we will discuss application record keeping and its importance to herbicide application. We will also discuss the various types of herbicide regulations and some of the key pieces of legislation governing herbicide storage, transportation, and use. We will conclude with an introduction to industry and professional associations as a key resource for pest control operations. Let's start by discussing herbicide application record keeping. Keeping accurate records of herbicide applications can be beneficial in a variety of ways. First, regulations may vary by jurisdiction and type of herbicide used, but applicators are typically responsible for maintaining accurate and detailed records by federal, tribal, state, or local government agencies. In addition to legal requirements, comprehensive record keeping helps in tracking the history of an application site, which can be useful as you determine future herbicide applications and monitor pest resistance at a site. And finally, if an accident or herbicide exposure occurs, providing accurate application records can help medical personnel in prescribing treatments. As stated earlier, requirements vary for what information needs to be recorded and how long application records need to be retained. Typically, recording the following application details can be useful to applicators: the date of the application, the specific site location, the contact name of the company or agency for whom the herbicide was applied, the licensed applicator's name, the product name, EPA registration number, and active ingredients, the application solution measurements and mixing procedures, the exact volume or rate of herbicide applied, the wind direction and velocity, and the air temperature. Other considerations you may want to record are the humidity, the target species, and any visual documentation of pre-existing conditions such as declining vegetation. In the attachments area of this module, you will find 5 samples of applicator records forms taken from various State Department of Agriculture websites. Keep in mind that these are offered solely as examples for this learning module and may not be the most current forms. Additionally, remember that record-keeping requirements vary by geography. Electronic spray records may also be utilized through a variety of software platforms. This alternative to written documentation is just one of many features of computer software that increases accountability and efficiency of herbicide applications. Next, let's take a look at herbicide regulations. There are numerous regulations governing a variety of aspects when dealing with herbicides, including purchasing, handling, use, storage, and transportation, among others. These regulations are enforced at the federal, tribal, state, and local levels, and it is each person's job to know and understand the regulations and requirements applicable to themselves, their business, and their employees. For the next few minutes, we will discuss some of the key regulations that govern herbicides at the federal, tribal, state, and local levels. Note, we are only covering some of the regulations related to herbicides and that these regulations are constantly evolving. It is each individual's responsibility to stay abreast to all of the herbicide regulations that apply. Pesticides are regulated at the federal level by the EPA primarily under the authority of the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, or FIFRA. FIFRA gives the EPA the authority to regulate the sale, use, and distribution of pesticides in the United States. In order for a pesticide product to be manufactured, transported, and sold, the manufacturer of the product must obtain registration and the product's label must be approved by the EPA. For more information on FIFRA, visit the link to the EPA website included on the screen. We discussed EPA-approved herbicide product labels in detail in the Understanding Herbicide Product Labels module of this learning series. However, here are some key reminders. First, the herbicide product label is the law. Failure to comply with label instructions could result in legal action and fines. Second, aside from the legal obligation to follow the label, information found in the Directions for Use section can help you optimize the effectiveness of your applications. And finally, precautionary statements including signal words, personal protective equipment, and first aid information found on the label provide important information on potential human and environmental hazards, including information on worker protection. For a detailed review of the purpose and importance of labels as well as an introduction to some of the key contents of product labels, view the Understanding Product Labels module. For information on product labels, visit either of the links shown on the screen. In addition to FIFRA, there are 3 additional key pieces of legislation enforced by the EPA. These include the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, or FFDCA, the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, or NPDES, and the Worker Protection Standard, or WPS. We will introduce and provide a brief introduction to each of these now. The FFDCA authorizes the EPA to place tolerances or limitations on the amount of herbicide residue that is acceptable on foods. According to the website, the EPA considers, among other things, the toxicity of the herbicide and its breakdown products, aggregate exposure to herbicide in foods and from other sources, and any special risks posed to infants and children. The NPDES permit program was established within the Clean Water Act to protect United States waterways from the discharge of all point sources of pollution. NPDES regulations vary by region, and some states have been authorized by the EPA to issue permits. Otherwise, you may need to go to your regional EPA office to obtain an NPDES permit. So far, we have discussed the EPA-enforced regulations surrounding herbicide limits in foods and waterways. Now, let's talk about EPA enforcement of your safety with the Worker Protection Standard, or WPS. These federal regulations are imposed on employers and herbicide manufacturers and are designed to protect employees from occupational exposure to herbicides. Topics covered in WPS include pesticide safety training for employees, notification of pesticide application and restricted entry intervals, use of personal protective equipment, and providing decontamination supplies and emergency medical assistance to employees. Note that not all products are covered under the WPS. Be sure to check for a WPS clause on the product label before handling a pesticide. For more information on these and other EPA-enforced regulations, contact your local state agency and visit the EPA website shown on the screen. In addition to the EPA, FDA, and USDA, there are a variety of additional federal agencies that regulate aspects of working with herbicides. 2 of these agencies that we will highlight here are the Occupational Safety and Health Administration and the Department of Transportation. As stated on its website, the mission of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, is to assure safe and healthful workplaces by setting and enforcing standards and by providing training, outreach, education, and assistance. As part of this mission, OSHA may conduct inspections of workplaces to determine compliance with the Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970. For more information on OSHA and this act, visit the website listed on the screen. The Department of Transportation, or DOT, regulations require that herbicides are properly packaged, marked, and labeled through shipment. We discuss transporting herbicides and the DOT regulations in more detail in the Handling, Storing, and Transporting Herbicides module of this learning series. Additional information can be found through the DOT website. In addition, there are other federal agencies that may require additional use and regulations on those lands, such as Fish and Wildlife, Bureau of Land Management, Department of Environmental Quality, and your state's Department of Forestry. Be sure to contact your local state agency for more information. State regulations on herbicides are particularly important because state agencies play a role in herbicide product registration as well as defining and enforcing applicator licensing and certification requirements. The herbicide regulatory offices in a state are often but not always part of the State Department of Agriculture. Use the link found on the screen and in the attachments area of this module to identify the state herbicide regulatory agency in a state. In addition to federal requirements for herbicide regulation, each state may have its own regulations for herbicide applications. In fact, it is the state that has primary responsibility for herbicide use and enforcement within the state's borders. In some cases, a state may impose additional requirements for herbicide use beyond those required by the EPA. Additionally, in the case of spills, misapplication, or other herbicide-related incidents, it is typically the state agency that handles any necessary investigation. It is important to note that if a spill occurs, be sure to contact your state agency and manufacturer. Applicator certification is also regulated at the state level, as herbicide licensing requirements can vary from state to state. Additionally, licensing needs within a state can often depend on the type of herbicide work to be completed. For example, a state may offer a business license, a commercial applicator license, or a private applicator's license. Furthermore, it is also possible that regulations and certification requirements in a state may differ according to the end-use designation. Examples of end-use designations that may have different regulation and licensing categories include pest control for areas such as agricultural, rangeland, industrial and right-of-ways, forests, and aquatic. In order to achieve the appropriate level of certification to sell, transport, or apply herbicides, management, sales personnel, supervisors, technicians, and applicators may need to complete training required by the state. The type of training opportunities available in a state can include classroom training, on-the-job training, and discretionary training. In addition to initial training requirements needed to obtain the appropriate herbicide licenses, most states also require periodic recertification. The frequency of renewals and continuing education requirements vary from state to state. Applicators operating in more than one state may be able to obtain a license through the Reciprocal License Agreement Program. This program, available in many states, means an applicator may obtain a license in participating states with proof of current certification along with an application. Warning: just because you are certified in one state doesn't necessarily mean you are allowed to perform applications in another state. For more information on applicator training, certification, and recertification requirements, applicators should contact the local state herbicide regulatory agency. Insurance is the final area of state regulations we will cover in this module. Commercial pesticide applicators must provide proof of insurance in all states that they operate. Additionally, customers may require applicators to have insurance. It is up to the applicator to understand and comply with insurance requirements in the states in which they operate. Applicators must also decide if this level of insurance provides sufficient coverage for their business or if they would prefer additional coverage. Your state pesticide regulatory agency can provide information on the minimum insurance required. Individuals or organizations may consider consulting their legal representative or insurance agent to determine the level of coverage that is appropriate for their business. Along with some of the key federal and state regulations, it is also important to mention that applicators must also comply with local regulations associated with general or restricted use herbicides. These regulations can be set up by local tribes, counties, cities, and townships. Some examples of local herbicide regulations can include no spray zones or places where herbicides cannot be sprayed in a municipality, such as areas near vineyards, ornamental trees, or organic farming. Date restrictions on specific herbicide formulations. An example of this is 2,4-D restrictions during certain months in the state of Texas. Restrictions related to protecting nesting areas of native birds, bats, or other wildlife. And restrictions intended to protect endangered species or reduce the risk of herbicide movement into bodies of water. Most counties and townships have specific requirements and regulations and can change at any time. As with federal and state regulations, applicators are responsible for knowing and adhering to them or risk enforcement and penalties. There are a variety of resources to learn more about local herbicide regulations. One key resource is the local county extension office, which can review any issues that may impact a particular application. Additionally, county bulletins provide valuable information to help with the protection of endangered species in your area. So far in this module, we have discussed why record keeping is a critical component of your application procedures, as well as many of the federal, tribal, state, and local regulations related to herbicide mixing, loading, transporting, and application. We will conclude this module with a brief introduction to industry and professional associations and how membership and active participation in these organizations can help individuals stay up to date with the constantly changing herbicide application industry. There are many advantages of participating in industry and professional associations. First, participants will be able to stay up to date on the many changes in this ever-evolving industry. Organizations provide information on items such as new products, new and changing regulations, with particular emphasis on certification and recertification issues for state and local regions. Additionally, industry and professional associations offer the opportunity to share and learn best practices with others who work in the industry. And further, the training that some associations offer may be eligible for continuing education credits for members of the association. There are a variety of associations at the national, regional, state, and local levels offering services to members of the herbicide industry. Some of these include national and regional weed science societies, state-level vegetation management associations, and local state extension programs. Individuals and organizations are encouraged to identify the best association for their business and to participate to the extent that they feel is best. As we conclude this module, let's review some of the main messages you have seen and heard. First, we discussed herbicide application record keeping and how that can be a useful tool not only to fulfill legal requirements but also to help applicators prepare for future applications. In addition to record keeping, we also discussed that there are many regulations that govern herbicide purchasing, handling, use, storage, and transportation, among others that these regulations are enforced at various levels of government, including federal, state, and local levels. Throughout this discussion, we referenced a few of the many resources available to help understand these regulations. A list of some resources can be found in the attachments area of the module. And finally, we introduced industry and professional associations as valuable resources to help individuals and organizations stay up to date with evolving regulations and best practices for herbicide use. Congratulations! You have now completed this learning module on record keeping and regulations. Please answer the following questions to confirm your understanding of the material we discussed.